it is above Manchester and Liverpool on the northwest of the UK, on the west coast. And that's where Lancaster is today. If I'm completely honest, no offense to any Lancastrians who might be listening, not so significant today. Like, you wouldn't know that it was actually such an important part of the country's history. I've never been myself. You ever been?
I've not. I think that's I always say about the North in general. The North, in terms of its history, has so much importance and so much power that got lost south almost. The power that used to sit in the North that just kind of seemed to slowly move down south. I think the power of the old days was way more northern than it was southern.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, and it's interesting. But don't be fooled, though. Just because we're talking about the House of Lancaster, which is a small location within the UK, that doesn't mean that these people weren't relevant all over the place, because they would eventually become the kings of England. So everywhere in England and the Principality of Wales, if I said that right, historians don't crucify me. You know, these Lancastrians are super important. So let's talk about like a little bit of an overview before we jump into the stuff that we've discovered, because we were like, should we jump straight into it? We're like, no, we're going to need some background here for, you know, the core themes of stuff that happened during this time period. If I just switch back to our cams here. Would you like to go Monkey Nuts, or would you like me to go and give a summary?
You can. I'll take it when we get to some of the wars.
All right, so you're going to make me pronounce Plantagenet. Plantagenet. Yeah. So
that's part of the reason. I still don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. The first thing I was looking into is, all right, so what actually is the House of Lancaster, right? Like, when did it start? How did it start? Like, what actually is this thing? And basically, there was a guy called Edmund Plantagenet. I'm pretty sure I've got that right. And it's from something called, like, you know when you see those diagrams of kings and queens, and there's absolutely loads of them, and there's you know who's mom, who's dad, whatever. So the House of Plantagenet.
That's changed.
It must be a French word, I'm telling you. It's a hard one to say. They were the ruling, the ruling house at the time. But Edmund Plantagenet, I'm just going to go with it. I'm just going to call him Edmund, okay?
Yeah.
Edmund became the first Earl of Lancaster, and he is what's called a cadet branch. So basically, he was like a younger sibling of someone who was going to be heir to the throne. So Edmund, was never really destined his line to become a king or whatever. So we call that a cadet branch. It's like a sort of spin-off or whatever. Like in real life, I got two older brothers. If my dad was king, I would be a cadet branch, because I would never be in line unless something happened to both my older brothers. Which, as you can imagine, in the Middle Ages, wasn't that uncommon, right? Turns out stuff people got hurt all the time. Fun fact about this Edmund guy. He later got known as Crouchback, so Edmund Crouchback, and I'm like, okay, so like, people weren't very kind back then. I thought maybe he was like a bit crippled, like walking around like hunched over, because back then there weren't surnames, right? So if you had two people in the village with the same name, you'll be like Billy and Billy Bighead. You'll be like, oi, Bighead, like that. I feel like that's how you got people's names, right? So Edmund Crouchback, I was like, I thought he must be like.
I mean, is that changed till now? I feel that's still common practice. You go into places like the army. I'm pretty sure that's how they name people still.
Yeah, true. The Crouchback actually apparently just means crossback, for whatever reason. I guess it's like an old English, Middle English term. Crossback, as in Jesus, the cross. So turns out actually it's not a negative. It's actually a positive. It's because he went and fought in the Crusades. So they called him Crossback, as in the guy with the cross on his cross on his back. So yeah, it's actually a really cool thing to be named, and it's just referred to his participation in those Crusades, not a physical deformity. But anyway, I'll jump through some irrelevant. Well, I say irrelevant. Of course, they're all relevant in the grand scheme of history, but we're not going to remember them in this video. So I'll just go through them quite quickly. Okay, Edmund had a kid called Henry. Henry also had a kid called Henry. Shock, I know. That Henry had no sons, so he had a daughter called Blanche. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Blanche. And she married a guy called John of Gaunt. And John of Gaunt inherited basically the House of Lancaster because he married her. That's kind of significant because technically his sons aren't, like if you follow his line, but still, he ended up having another son. Guess his name?
Henry.
Yeah, it's Henry. And that Henry, a reason I fast forwarded through that is because that Henry is Henry IV, and he ended up becoming king. And he also had a Henry V. and he had a Henry VI, and all three of those were king at some point, and over the major events that were happening at the time. So 100 Years' War and War of the Roses, which we'll get to, and then it all ends. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, Monkey Nuts, if you understand differently, but it all ends with, at the end of the War of the Roses, which we'll talk about in a sec, basically the Lancastrian line was pretty much decimated, and there was only a distant relative left, Henry, funnily enough, Henry Tudor, and he essentially married someone of York, Elizabeth, I think, of York, and they ended up creating the House of Tudor, and that was the next, era of English history. So, Monkey Nuts, I'm going to pass to you to talk a little bit about the two major events which dominated the House of Lancaster era.
So the first one being, obviously, as alluded on, the 100 Years' War. So this is a 100 Years' War, which fondly titled because it's a war that lasted 116 years, but was only fought for 81 years. And actually, technically, it's 3 wars rolled into one war that had truces between, just to make it extra confusing, because you don't want it to be anything clear in English history and French history as well.
Just history generally.
Just history generally.
I think they do it though to like make it easier to remember these things. Like I think they sort of romanticize. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to remember the 116-year war. I'm just not going to remember that. But 100-year war, it clicks in the brain,
Or remembering that it's all broken down into the First War, which is the Edwardian War.
Right.
Then it goes into the Caroline War, then the Lancastrian War. So the First War, the Edwardian War, that was named after the fact it was initiated by King Edward. So, named after him, the Edwardian War. So basically, the French king confiscated an English-held duchy called Guyenne. And I'm going to hopefully I pronounced that right.
No idea, mate. Let's go for it.
And after that, he basically said, well, that's it, we're declaring war. That's the very brief. There's a lot more that goes into it, but that's the very top level of why they declared war. But they didn't land so they started war in 1337, didn't land until 1346. And those who know their history well, they know that's the same time as when the Black Death started.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So they landed, and the Black Death started.
About harbingers, at the end days.
So basically, they landed in 1346, and they agreed to a truce in 1347. So a year after they basically landed, because they were being absolutely ravaged by the Black Death. It was an awful truce, because the truce actually meant that they were still fighting. So it was a truce, but not really a truce. So they were still fighting through that period.
Not too dissimilar to the modern day, to be fair, if you look at some of the stuff going on.
The whole distinction, I think that's a part of the reason why it's only 81 years of war, because they were fighting kind of throughout any truces, and there were like skirmishes throughout some bits. I think there was only one point of peace-ish to the Caroline War, which ended in 1389, was the longest period of peace. It was 1389 to 1415. So now we start with where the Lancastrians are coming to the thrones, and they are taking the fight back to them. So, well, technically, the Lancashire had already taken the throne because there was Henry IV before that, and he was a Lancastrian. But Henry V, he took he was crowned in 1413. A year later, he was already entering negotiations into France to go, basically, give us 1.6 million crowns. I don't know how much it is now. It's apparently an unpaid ransom for an old king. In addition, cede the lands of Normandy, Touraine, Brittany, Anjou, Flanders, and Aquitaine.
Right.
Thinking that was going to be successful. And he went, yeah, give us all of that. Otherwise, we otherwise we're going to have to come to blows here. And they basically, unshockingly, the demands were not met by the French. And apparently the English monarchy felt that they'd been mocked by the French.
Okay.
They were like, these guys are mocking us. As you know, fair. Classic in these periods.
As an Englishman, yeah. I'm outraged. I can't believe they didn't accept that.
So the war was inevitable. So by 1415, he got sanctioned the war to France, and he went and landed that year in France. And this was a successful campaign. He was known as a kind of a warrior king, because he was on the front line with his troops. He didn't shy away from a battle, and he was apparently a master tactician. So his son Henry VI was actually he married Charles VI, who was the current king of France's daughter. So his son Henry VI actually had a legitimate claim to both thrones.
The nobility actually still spoke French at this point. If you think like William the Conqueror's 1066, and this stuff's kicking off only a few hundred years later, this is just a few like descendants down. They're still speaking French, up in these in royalty, and the 100 Years' War really started to sort of develop that sense of English identity. And it also, as weird as this is to say in the modern day, is the first time that England started to be viewed as an island nation. So before that, it was just seen as England that had territories here and there, as in like it was all one place. But after the end of the 100 Years' War, when they had pretty much nothing left on the continent, it sort of had that identity of being like England, the island, country, which is kind of weird again for us. It seems so obvious, but at the time, not so much.
And Henry VI basically lost the entirety of France, apart from a tiny little bit in Calais. That's why I say pretty much all of France.
Okay.
So they theorize because apparently Henry VI had lots of mental health issues, and they think they know what it is: catatonic schizophrenia. That's what the theory is of what he had, which basically makes him immobile at points. Apparently,
wow.
Apart from being the general schizophrenia. So apparently, after the end of the 100-Year War, he was literally immobile for 18 months. He just couldn't move. England was in disarray, absolute disarray, and
after the disastrous 100 Years' War, you mean?
Yeah, after the disastrous 100 Years' War, we had 18 months of him being basically immobile as a king because of his presumptuous catatonic schizophrenia. He was part of the Lancastrians and the Yorkists, who are also direct descendants of Edward III. Went, well, I think we should take the throne. I think we have as rightful claim as you do. We should go for this. So Henry VI was deposed in 1461, so only 6 years into the War of the Roses, which was a 23-year-long war, a 22-year-long war even, and he was assassinated in 1471 in the Tower of London, which is a really common assassination place. If you look through history, very common place for people to be assassinated is the Tower of London.
For people who play the game, the Tower of London is actually a White Tower landmark as well when you hit Castle Age. But yeah, go on.
It's a really cool location. If you're ever in London, worth a visit, absolutely. But it wasn't the end of the War of the Roses. It was actually, as you said, Henry Tudor who was the eventual victor. So his father's half brother was Henry VI, and his mother's second cousin was Henry VI. So this is the usual relations people's family had. A lot of inbreeding but his mother was a sex member of Edward III. But it was more, again, it was, as you said, he married Elizabeth of York, who was daughter of Edward IV, and they legitimized, and he united Lancastrians and Yorkists. So technically, Lancastrians won the War of the Roses because he was a Lancastrian. That was his descendancy. But he kind of united the Yorkists and Lancastrians by marrying a Yorkist, ending the War of the Roses, and starting the reign of the House of Tudor.
There you go. So it was sometimes called the Civil Wars, or the wars between the houses of Lancaster and York, or sometimes the Trouble of the Times. My favourite one. The Trouble of the Times.
That's very Northern Ireland, that is.
Yeah, I was going to say.
All out Civil War, the Troubles.
Yeah. The Trouble of the Times, it was called. But it started being called the War of the Roses like way later, in like 1800s, because of some book that someone wrote, basically. And then Shakespeare really popularized the idea in one of his plays where the nobles had to show their allegiance by picking either a red rose or a white rose, which didn't happen in real life. But it really sort of popularized that. And Henry Tudor as well, and the Tudor era really sort of, because they blended the red rose and the white rose to create that unity.
Yep.
They really sort of pushed the idea that the Lancastrians were wearing red roses on stuff all the time, when in reality they actually weren't. Like the white rose was sometimes worn, more commonly, whereas the red rose wasn't really actually used during the time that much, just a little bit here and there. Neither of them were the primary symbol, but they've sort of been, retroactively seen. And again, like we said, why is it called the 100 Years' War? It's just easier to remember. Why is it called the War of the Roses? Just better than the Civil War. There's so many civil wars out there.
Or even the English Civil War. I think there's probably more of those that could really shake a stick at. So
there's another English Civil War a little bit later. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Anyway, that's our super long introduction out of the way. Let's jump into the first major segment, which is the bonuses you get for picking the civilization in game. So if you haven't played, basically it's just like these themes, the themes that they chose to when they were choosing the civilization that they associate with it. And one of the themes is called a house unified. I'll take this one. I don't have a tons to say about it really. It's relatively brief, especially because we covered so much of it in the intro. But think about it like this: kings at the time, they had several sons, lands, and titles. As lands and titles were split among these sons, right? And the Lancasters gathered this land and therefore power under one branch. So the early Lancastrian kings, they achieved a lot of internal unity, which wasn't really so much of a thing. So think of it like this: it's like if all your sons have their own land and power, like that's quite nice and it's fair. But it also means that if one of them's got a problem, they can easily raise an army and it can cause internal strife. So with the Lancasters and Henry IV, he really sort of started to bring everyone under one sort of banner, right? And then Henry V took what he'd started and really made it like that powerful unity. So I think that's why they call it a house unified, is the idea that England was its most unified ever up until obviously the War of the Roses, when it was its least unified ever. You know,
I think up until Henry VI generally, I think he just created
Yeah.
that man was the
Yeah.
one of the worst kings in history. If you look at them all, I think there is some worse, but he's one of the worst.
Yes, yeah. I mean, every country has them, mate. Like, every country seems to have them. Like, what was that Russian one who just loved putting everyone on a spike, didn't he? Like, that was like his pastime. It was just mad. But anyway, the next topic is, I'm going to pronounce this right. So I've been calling it Byrig, defensive Byrig. It's actually Byrig, apparently. Byrig, yeah. Okay. Again, this is like a Middle English, Old English term. Defensive Byrig is one of the themes that they've associated with this civilization, but it's actually not really correct, because defensive Byrig is something from way before them, Anglo-Saxon era, and Byrig just means forts, plural. So Bur is fort, Byrig is forts, like multiple, plural. So everything essentially, like in that time when Anglo-Saxons were being, shall we say, invaded by Vikings, who usually their primary threat, I think most people and historians would agree, during the era. These Burs, they acted as like defensive refuges for the local populations. So imagine, like, you know, you're on the farms or whatever, you're hearing there's like flames and screaming and raiding. Where are you going to go? You're going to run to your local Bur, and they're going to look after you, right? And then you're going to kind of lock up in there, and you're going to, you know, wait it out, wait for rescue or safety, or, you know, whatever. And they also became like mobilization centers for militia. So this is where like they'd be like, all right, everyone gather here in 2 nights, and then we're going to head off and do this and that. So they became like these sort of central areas and meeting points. And they were also like, they were created along rivers and roads, you know, as like what's it called? Major areas that were worth defending, basically. So it ended up being like a sort of defensive network at some point. Later down the line, but it all started, like, some of these things were just Roman forts, you know. This is how far back we're talking, like 2,000 years, you know, like some of these things. And then eventually they were sort of built up upon by you know, like I said, Anglo-Saxons and stuff, long before the Lancastrian time. But then eventually, far down the line, you know, these burhs would become the modern day boroughs, and the borough system that we have. They'd be later developed into the parliamentary system that England still uses, or the UK, you know, uses to this day. So it's kind of cool, like, if something all the way from a Roman fort is now modern day. If I think of some examples off the top of my head, Winchester, if you've heard of that, Exeter, Warwick, and so many other places all started out as just one of these places where you'd run to if you were being raided, you know? It's kind of weird to think about.
So Berg is it's more in the fact of, because there's multiple, and in fact because it almost made it sound like at the start that they were next to each other, almost, that there's multiple forts in one location, but it's more because they were forts all dotted around. That's why it was called.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. So that the English generally had that sort of, and that's why I think the game follows that theme of like England being harder to, you know, raid and stuff, just because they have more defensive, you know, network and fortified settlements and whatnot. And so, yeah, there's if a modern day town ends in borough, or Bur. It probably was one of these back in the day, although not always.
A lot of them do.
Yeah, not always, because the English language is so hella confusing. If it's Berry, as in Berry, that's a completely different story, apparently. That's nothing to do with this. That's a different thing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And in terms of its relevance to the Lancasters, well, by the time the Lancastrian era came around and during the War of the Roses, many of these Byrig were still used, right? They were still used as points of focusing power, points of defensive, and yeah, so nothing specific to them. I'd say that's an interesting one for the devs to keep, but, you know, they kept it, so makes sense. Or choose, I should say. But yeah, You got a lot to tell me about wool industries. You've told me in advance.
I did not know how important wool was to English history.
Okay.
I just didn't know, and now I'm finding out. So in essence, let's go start of the 13th, end of the 13th century ish. You could find the best weavers in the continent, so like Flanders, Bruges, Ghent, Ypres. I think that's how you pronounce it.
No, I didn't.
So basically, in the late 13th century, the first king decided, all right, we're exporting a lot of wool. I maybe should get some money out of this, and started taxing the exports out of anything out of England for any wool leaving England. And it was also that king, it was actually Edward I, who said all the wolves should be killed. So that's when all the wolves in England were killed.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
To protect the sheep.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I knew that UK had native wolves, but didn't know that it was an active effort to kill them.
Active choice, and there was some certain famous people because they were famous for killing wolves, not for battles, for wolf killing. I haven't got any specific names, but there was just loads of people just I'm famous for wolf killing. I'm like the wolf killer.
That's
and it was rewarded by the crown basically to kill wolves.
Beast hunters.
Yeah. But it was so important that the income from wool, that by the time that Henry V, so midway through the Lancastrian reign, 63% of the crown's income ish was from wool export.
No way, 63.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, but nearly 2/3 was wool exports.
Man, we got a lot of sheep.
Yeah, it was so important that wealthy nobles, that they weren't saying like how much money do I have, how much land do I have. It's how many sheep do I have. that was the recognition of how much wealth. So they counted their sheep to go like I'm so wealthy because I've got X sheep. So the largest was actually some of the Yorkshire abbeys. And one in particular, the largest ownership was something called Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire. Had 18,000 sheep, and also, by the way, fantastic to visit. If you're ever in England, in the north of England, go visit Fountains Abbey. It's an amazing ruins. You can still go see loads of it. It's really cool.
I've never actually heard of it.
Cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's near where my wife grew up, so that's why I've been up there and seen it.
Understood.
But amazing. So they had loads of sheep up there. That was and it was actually as much as the 100 Years' War was started because of the steep taking of land. Another thing was actually partly to protect the wool trade with Flanders. That's another seen as another starting point of the 100 Years' War, because apparently people in Flanders were asking for English protection because they were still kind of partially under our rulership then, and wanting that kind of protection because it was protecting the wool industry.
It all comes back to money, doesn't it? At the end,
it all comes back to money.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because obviously at the time, talking about obviously there's been a lot of talk about tariffs. This is one of the earliest indication of tariffs, and actually these heavy tariffs. Not one of the there's loads of stuff, but this is one of the impact of the levies on the export of wool damaged the wool trade so much. It ends up being that cloth was being produced in England rather than being exported because it was so expensive to export the cloth over there. And the 100-Year War also brought a lot of these Flemish weavers to England that settled in England because of the 100 Years' War. A lot of them came over to here as well. So there's a lot of towns that were kind of almost started up because of Flemish weavers coming to England, starting up towns and doing wool here.
That's crazy. Obviously, I knew we had a farming culture and whatnot, but I never really knew that how significant sheep was in the agriculture. That's for the crown, I should say.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not just the crown making money for this. Everyone was making money. So on the back of the wealth of cloth, with churches, bridges, castles, university, colleges, guild halls, and manor houses were built with the proceeds.
Oh yeah, manor house is something maybe addressed in our second episode when we talk about the buildings.
It may well be. It may well be.
Okay.
But the impact is so much that even today there is a large red cloth-covered seat full with wool in the House of Lords called the wool sack. If you want to bring up the picture for people who are watching.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Here you go.
This is the wool sack, and it was. Those who don't know what the House of Lords is, it's the second in the British parliamentary system. We have two houses. You've got the House of Commons and the House of Lords. House of Commons is the people that we elect. House of Lords is full of people we don't elect. And So slightly contentious, the existence of the House of Lords, but I'll leave that for someone else to discuss. So the origin of the woolsack comes all the way back from Edward III. So so just before like the House of Lancaster were around here, but not before they were on the throne. And he was the instigator of the 100 Years' Wars, and he said that his Lord Chancellor, while in council, should sit on a wall bane known as the woolsack. And so that was all the way back then, and up until 2006. The Lord Chancellor sat on the woolsack.
So describe what we're looking at here, because I'm not even sure.
Yeah, it's a massive red poof. I think is the
puffy seatness.
Yeah, it's got a back. It's huge. I'd say you could fit, if you were lying down, you could fit a whole person lying down in it, I reckon.
But that thing is full of wool right there. That's all just wool.
Full of wool. Okay. Wow. That's it. We'll come up to that soon. Okay. But yes, it should be full of wool.
But there's drama. Of course, there's conspiracy theories.
No, there's no conspiracy theories. There's real shit.
Okay, yeah, that's what they all say.
So up until 2006, it was what Edward III declared that it should be the Lord Chancellor. But in 2006, they created a new position called the Lord Speaker, and now the Lord Speaker sits there, and I hate that. We've got all this history to say the Lord Chancellor should sit in this seat, and then you create this new position called the Lord. Leave the Lord Chancellor in that seat. That's the Lord Chancellor seat. Edward III said so back in the 13th century. Leave it be. Why in 2006 do we declare it should be someone else in that seat?
One of the things I've just found so interesting on this journey of looking stuff up is just like how many things still are around today in some form, or sometimes in the exact form that they were. We're talking nearly 1,000 years ago for some of this stuff. Some of it way more, And it's I don't know. It's crazy. It kind of builds like a deeper appreciation for your country as well when you sort of start to learn these things. Maybe to the average person might just seem crazy, but then it's like, oh yeah, there's a story. There's a story behind everything. Like if you're an American, for example, love you guys, brothers, but at the end of the day, your stories only go back a few hundred years, right? So like if you even have a story, right?
The story of those people there's people there beforehand. Their history goes a little longer.
Yeah, well, let's quickly move on. So
the last thing about this woolsack is it was in 1938 they discovered it wasn't actually, it was full of horsehair, not wool.
No, that's a scam then.
It was a scandal, yeah. So apparently it was restuffed with wool from all over the British Isles and the Commonwealth to show the unity between us and the Commonwealth. It was so restuffed with the wool. Yeah.
There was horsehair all along. Oh man.
Yes, horsehair.
What a twist. That is so funny. Oh. Man, drama was fun back in the day. It was just, little things. All right.
That's it. That's the wool industry.
Our next topic is shipwrights. And this is one I'm going to cover. It's a hard act to follow, the wool industries. I did not realize that was as significant as it was going to be. Thought you were going to come at me with 2 lines there and move on. But
I thought I was when I first looked at it. I was like, nah, wool is going to be a nothing burger. I was like, because it's always like the game all it is, you start with extra sheep, and I was like, oh, it's just going to be like we like sheep, lots of sheep in Wales, but
no, that's not so much. So shipwrights, it's more relevant than my last one, the Byrig one, but it's still a little bit lacking in relevance, which is that it means shipbuilders, and England has a historical focus on naval prowess. You probably know this, but we're talking even before the whole Royal Britannia era. There has always been it's one of the most powerful naval traditions in Europe, and in the late medieval period and onwards especially. This does include the 100 Years' War, which of course is where the Lancastrians come into it. So the House of Lancaster, as we know, rose to prominence during the 100 Years' War, and then naval capabilities were essential for the supply lines and the English Channel, essentially, and winning naval campaigns there. Especially at the beginning, I believe there was one very early. So yeah, England has built a strong shipbuilding tradition, and it was heavily supported by the Crown through policies encouraging the construction as well of merchant and military vessels. But I guess that's like modern day subsidies, isn't it? Like where a government wants to encourage a particular industry, so they start putting money towards it. So the Crown did that with shipbuilding as well. So they really wanted to make it like something that England just always had a lot of ships. and so it was profitable for individuals to be in the business and being in the trade, and and I think I think that's probably why they've associated it with House of Lancaster here in this game. It makes sense. They utilized it much like their predecessors, and the people after them is really where it started to escalate. Like English naval power just started to beyond the timeline of the game. We are talking, as you are, I'm sure everyone is aware, England is famous for its naval capabilities. That's all I got for Shipwrights.
Very kind of simplistic view of how feudalism worked, which is, I can't go through it, which is, you have the king. The king owns all the land. The king then gives land to nobles. Nobles give land to vassals. Vassals protect the peasants. And in return, the peasants provide food and labor, and sometimes provide armies be the armies for vassals and nobles. The vassals provide protection for the nobles provide knights and soldiers for the king. So it kind of is this circular of giving, but very much with the king having the ultimate control over everything. So that was kind of the structure of it as a real base.
Okay. Okay. But it's funny. I hear the word feudalism so often. I don't think I've ever really truly thought about what it actually means.
Yeah.
So this what you've talked about here, this 4 caste system of kings, nobles, vassals, and peasants. That is feudalism, yeah?
That is the simplistic view, because you could break down these into the nobles and vassals. You can break down to so many more levels.
Categories, I'm sure.
These are the, and there's, I mean, even peasants. You have serfs as well, but as their own category almost below them. But these are the very simplistic kind of makeup of how the basic. This is an idiot's guide to feudalism.
Right.
Is what I describe
it as.
I
like it. I like idiot's guide. To keep it fairly simple. Yeah, it makes sense. So you basically work for your superiors essentially, and in return they give you safety, or maybe as you can see, land or whatever the situation is. Yeah. All right. Good stuff, man.
And feudalism was kind of started. So I think with that, when we talk about specifically the House of Lancaster, feudalism was actually coming to the end issue. Feudalism didn't end immediately, but it was actually not that as strong during that point, because the Black Death kind of increased bargaining power for peasants because so many people died.
Right.
And it kind of eventually kind of ended, I'd say, in 1649. That was when it truly believed. That's when people declared it ended. So not too far after them, but still a good time after. But so moving then on to the next people, which is our Yeoman, which is going into our unit specific thing within it, which is a unique unit. They were kind of a symptom of the end of feudalism, or the ending of feudalism. So they were kind of this new person on the pyramid. They weren't peasants, they weren't vassals. They were kind of this. I actually found really contentious when I was looking these up about what a yeoman was.
Yeah, because help me, idiot's guide. What is a yeoman?
Yeah. So this is contentious. A yeoman was someone who owned land, but they didn't necessarily own it by owning it. They could be renting it. So they weren't a vassal because they worked the land themselves. They generally someone who, rather than it was a vassal who'd go, you're a peasant, you work on my land, and the vassal didn't generally work. They were someone who, the land was theirs, they worked on the land themselves. And they either just gave rent money, or they weren't there to it was their own land in essence. That was the big turning point of what became with Yeoman. So that's the closest consensus I could find. Someone might try and correct me, but I believe based on all the different descriptions, that's the closest thing I can find.
So help me understand. They're not as high as nobles, but they're higher than peasants. They're not as high as
vassals. Exactly. So they're kind of in between peasants and vassals.
Okay, so they're like in between. Okay, so king, nobles, vassals, peasants, and yeomen slot in between peasants and vassals. Okay.
Exactly. So then you have almost like a distinction between what a yeoman is and a yeoman archer. So a yeoman archer is actually they could actually be a peasant and be a yeoman archer. Just to add extra confusion to everything is what it seems like.
Okay, yeah.
That's the way at the time of this. So a yeoman archer. So I've gone because actually the unit in the game actually I tried to find something which looked what I perceive as the closest from my research on what I think a yeoman archer would have looked like, because none of them were the same. So it was you could have someone who was a peasant, you could have someone who's more of a commoner, you could have someone it could be Welsh, they could be English, but they're in essence a longbow archer. And even more so, they could be mounted or on foot. because they earn more money if they were in the army and they were mounted. So we actually even no distinction between mounted or not.
That's interesting. Because I saw in some of my research as well that we could have. I found out about the concept of a mounted longbowman, and I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in my next segments or so. But I was like, can you imagine how angry people would be if that was in the game? They already hate longbowmen so much.
Mounted and a longbow,
mounted longbow,
that would be so tough. So the base definition, they were free-born commoners, and they were English or Welsh. But the reason they were so successful is that it was implemented in 1363 archery laws. And it's basically all Englishmen must practice archery on Sundays and holidays, and all leisure activities were banned. And this is the specific way I said: hurling of stones and wood and iron, and some in handball, football, bandyball, and cambuck.
Okay, I only know football, so clearly that one's made its way through history. Handball, I know I think it's a German sport, but maybe it's the same thing.
But I don't know if there's anything like what the sport was then.
What in the hell is bandyball?
I have no idea what bandyball was, but I looked up what cambuck was, which is it was a game which a ball was propelled with a curved stick, maybe like golf, maybe like hockey.
Okay, I like the maybes. Yeah. All right, hockey. There we go. It goes way back.
Yeah.
Private schools got the closest. They love playing hockey. They got that connection. No,
because it's not. Because these weren't noblemen. These are commoners.
All right, yeah. Common folk. They're taking our hobbies. No, that's cool. That's cool stuff. So remind me then. Clarify for me. So the game chooses to portray them as longbowmen, essentially archer equivalent. Yeah. Why is that? Why do you think they chose that, or was it just
because so that was because the commoners. So a yeoman would be a commoner, and because of this law that said they have to practice their archery on Sundays and holidays. Because of that law,
so they were
trained archers. Yeah. They were trained archers. So there was other laws before that which meant people had to, if you were a certain nobility, you had to have certain levels of armor and sword. Like you had certain levels. So if you were nobility, you had to. Exactly, you had to have equipment, you had to have proper armor, you had to have this sort of thing. But commoners were required to be bowmen, so they had lots. So I'm actually going to go into a specific one battle, which is a really famous battle, to kind of talk about the presence of the longbowmen and kind of a bit more about almost. I think this is one issue. So I'm going to talk about. So in the 100 Years' War, there was a few really famous longbow-dominated battles in which English won against all odds against massive French armies because of the longbow, and Agincourt was probably one of the most famous battles of this era. Henry V, he led his army to the battle here. So the crazy thing is, 80% of the army was longbows.
80? Yo, that's 80%. Like one of my AoE games.
Yeah, crazy. And obviously the French army was mostly knights, mostly horsemen. So again, knights on horseback were quite like the game. Yeah. In the game, though, the French would win this one. Yeah. They were outnumbered, maybe 2-1. It could be more, could be less, probably more in anything. And it had been raining, so the field was really muddy. So they positioned themselves, the English, in this kind of like. I'll bring up an image. Again, I'll try and describe it best I can. It was quite a thin strip of land with quite dense forest around the edges. And they created these wedge formations with their archers, and again, like they use in the game, they had these which this is actually really interesting because in the game, the English specifically have the spikes, the little shops. Yeah, they call them archer spikes, is what I found is some of the name back in the day.
Sure.
But you don't get to do it with the House of Lancaster, who are the ones who are in this. This is Henry V. This is House of Lancaster in their prime, using the spikes to great measure.
Yeah, that is interesting. Okay.
So they funneled the French into these kind of they had man at arms. You see where Edward of York, Henry V, and Camoys were. They funneled the French into these kind of where you would actually go because there's massive spikes. Yeah, kill zones in essence. So the horsemen, the knights were getting bogged down in this mud. They're getting peppered with these arrows. And in the end, the English lost about 400, and the French lost about 6,000.
6,000 to 400.
6,000. Yeah.
Holy hell! That is crazy. Some numbers there.
But I actually think one of my favourite stories of this though is there was apparently this one of these local knights from the French side who knew the lay of the land and managed to find his way through the forest and find its way to Henry's camp. Found all his gold and was like, instead of joining the fight, being like, "Oh, I found my way to the back lines," he just took the gold and buggered off. He just basically greeted the rest of it. He was like, "Oh my god, all this gold!" and just left.
Sacre bleu! Yes. You know what, bro? I might have done the same. I can't lie. Yes. Man. All right. Good stuff. Next topic.
Solid.
Is one of mine, and it's the Demilancer. And I have a little bit of a rant, I suppose. I'm a little bit disappointed because straight off the bat, I will say that it turns out when I looked up the Demilancer, they were not active during the timeline of the House of Lancaster, like at all. They really sort of started to be used in the 1500s, which, if you remember the dates at the start, when the House of Lancaster's over, right? We're talking Tudor era at that point. And they were he
was a Lancastrian though. He was a Lancastrian, yeah.
I guess. Yes.
No, I'm with you. It shouldn't be.
Yeah. So they're shock cavalry, and what they basically are, and is they have armor about 3/4. So we're talking the head, the body, the arms, and down to like the top of the thighs. The legs exposed, the horse also exposed, right? Like so, and the reason they do that is for it to be speedy and light. And the areas, only like the vital organs of the human, not the horse, are protected here. That's because they were an evolution to the invention of the arquebus, or later the musket. So the arquebus is like a really proto like musket technology. They needed to be faster to close the gap, maybe absorb a musket hit, on because it takes some ages to reload this stuff, right? This is really old tech. And the heavy knight era was just it was fading away. The era of the heavy knights, as cool as they are. They just didn't have the speed, and they weren't useful enough. So the heavy lancer became the Demilancer as like a sort of, evolution of technology there. In the game, they are, again, like I said, too early for their timeline, but they are in the game, and their feudal representation is the most accurate. They have a bit of armor on the body and nothing on the horse, but when you go up to Castle Age and Imperial Age, their horses are armored as well, which is like a bit strange to me because the whole point of a Demilancer is that they have less armor. Even their lance is less heavy intentionally, so that they can move around faster. So they just end up looking like knights, which is a little bit odd. I guess they still have the blue shirt to sort of show that they're not fully. I don't know, but the horse should really not be armored. For whatever reason, they made that call. Yeah, that is so that's a bit disappointing for me. Yeah, I guess the last thing I looked up was, this was a bit niche, but I noticed the models they're using in game for the cavalry are the HRE models reused a little bit. So I like on the armored or on the horses. So I tried to see if there's a connection between the Holy Roman Empire and Demi-Lancers generally. And while it turns out that Holy Roman Empire did set the trends at the time. So, like, in terms of cool-looking armor and fashion and stuff like that, like, a lot of people look to the Holy Roman Empire to be like the trendsetters. Like, oh yeah, that looks cool. I'm going to do that with mine. That kind of stuff. But that's a stretch, really. I think they just reused assets to save some money at the end of the day, which is a shame. Like I said, they didn't need to, because horse shouldn't be armored. So, anyway, yeah. That's it for the Demilancer. I thought it made sense to put the Hobelar here as well. So Hobelar, next category, is another cavalry, which is why I thought it made sense to put them together. This one actually is relevant. So the Hobelar was used early during the 100 Years' War, and by the time of the War of the Roses was obsolete. And it's used for scouting, raiding, skirmishing. So quite like how it's used in the game as well. It's native to Ireland. It's a horse called Hobbies, and the Hobbies rider is the Hobelar. So it's like a smaller, sturdy sort of horse, which is really good on rough terrain. And essentially, the Hobelar had a niche anywhere the knight couldn't really maneuver or operate. So anywhere where it's just too rocky, too mountainous, too this and that, like the armored knight, the armored lancer is not going to operate. It's not going to work well here. So during like this sort of Anglo-Irish, remember that during this time everyone was invading everyone. There's a lot of mixing of cultures, and you know, the Lancastrian times had territory in Ireland as well. So you know, it's not uncommon for technologies to pass and mix and stuff like that. So they got access to these horses. They used them in campaigns against the Scottish. As I said, they used them a little bit in the Hundred Years' War, and of course, just generally across Ireland because that's where they're most suitable. The Hobelars were used there as well. So it does make sense that they were included here and were given to the House of Lancaster. It's a cool little touch. What else can I tell you? They wore lighter armor. They just a gambeson, if you want to know what a gambeson is, imagine any medieval show you've ever watched in your life, and you know how they always have like a really sort of padded outfit. That's just the gambeson, you know. Like that's basically just imagine like anything, you know, even the ones that have. Yeah,
and you have to wear it under armor. I think it's if you don't wear if you wear an armor that a gambeson it won't be comfortable. It won't sit right, and it also won't give you padding because I think things like hammers it gives you more of a shock reflection. I believe that's what a gambeson also does. Kind of like deflects a lot of shock.
Yeah, you've looked into it.
I may be wrong about that. So don't take that into. That's from my own knowledge. I've not looked that up.
No, it's cool. It's cool. You know, during this journey, I've had to look up so many new words that I can't lie. Like I did sort of start to like sort of flag a little bit. I'll be like, you know what, I'm just going to skip this one. I'm going to look up only a little bit surface level. So yeah, I'm happy to be told I'm wrong. But yeah, sometimes they wore mail, sometimes a helmet, even not always, and they were all optimized for speed. So in a way, you can kind of think of it as like the Lancer, the Demilancer, the Hobelar. You know, it's almost like you know, up there from top to bottom in terms of how armored they were. But they were eventually replaced by mounted archers or mounted longbowmen, which is what I referenced earlier, which would be a crazy thing to imagine. It's quite impressive as well. I just didn't know they existed. You think of like mounted archers, you always think of. I just think of the Middle East and stuff. I don't know why. I think of like. I definitely don't think of Western Europe, but I mean, why not, right? If it works, you can learn how to do it. Why wouldn't these places learn how to do it as well? So,
but I wonder is just because we didn't use them in the same quantity as some of those places, which is why they're less synonymous. And even the Battle of Agincourt, when I was talking about it, actually, even though they had horses, everyone was on foot because he wanted unity across the army. As part of the tactic in that fight was that everyone was on foot from the English side.
Makes sense.
So
there you go.
Even if you had horse archers, they would have all been on foot at that battle.
Yeah, sounds cool. The sun is really starting to blast on me now. Oh, I'm heating up. Quick, Monkey Nuts, take the mic. Tell us about the Lord of Lancaster and whether it has any significance.
So in the game, what this unit does is it increases the max health of nearby units. So when you look up what a lord is a really catch-all term. So basically, if you're not royalty but owned land, and not a yeoman, if you own land in terms of you were given land by the king, you and had subjects, you were a lord. So that ranged from a duke to a baron with about 5-6 titles in between. All of those people were considered lords. So the concept I was going to talk about here is not what a Lord of Lancaster is, or not who a Lord of Lancaster is, because there would be thousands of them. Is more the concept of what they're doing in game, which is increasing the max health. And I think that it's a really interesting form where the inspiration of having someone on the front lines with you, because I can imagine if I was going into battle, especially going in this period. So if you bring up the image here,
sure.
I first of all got the unit in game on the right hand side, but I've also brought up Henry the Fifth. So he was really famous for fighting on the front line with his troops.
Let me just
so he was there.
Sorry to break your flow. Describe Henry V to our listeners.
He's a man with luscious lips. Let's put it that way. It's a side-on profile. He's got quite a big nose, I'd say as well. He's got quite a big nose, and I'd say a bowl cut. I describe his hair as.
Oh, I thought you were just bald with a hat. Oh, you're right. That is a bowl cut.
Oh, yeah, that's hair. Yeah, that's hair. That's hair.
That's hair.
I think it's a bowl cut. It's quite a curved bowl cut, but maybe that's probably the fashion of the time. You know, we can't judge the fashion of the eras.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even just 5 years ago, I look back at people's clothes. I'm like, what was that?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, carry on.
And he was showing off some of his jewelry as well. It's like, I think he's throwing gang signs. I don't know though.
Yes, some weird things with his hands there. Very nice.
But I think the concept of if I was in a battle And I could see, like, you obviously your king, the law, they make a speech, they inspire the troops. But I can imagine having that person, seeing that person on the front lines, or even hearing that person on the front line with you means that I have a chance of victory. Because you'd be like, if there's a chance we've lost, the king's falling back, or the lord, or your lord, whoever it is, because obviously he's not a lord, he's a king. Your lord is not going to be on the front lines with you. If they believe there is no chance of victory, they're not going to be with you. So I believe I think it's really interesting, the concept of them fighting alongside you would give you that inspiration to fight harder. I would actually almost argue that should give you attack boost, not health boost, because it would almost make you more overzealous and maybe lose your health, but more likely to get swinging blow that you need in.
I guess if it was a concept in this game, morale would be the best one, isn't it? Like on a tabletop game, like a game of Warhammer or whatever, when there is morale is taken into account. It makes sense for that to be boosted, or in Total War, right? Total War games have morale. You can get routed and run away. It's the kind of thing that I would imagine.
Exactly, and you have a lord that boosts it. If you're looking at something, if you have ones that have a lord unit, they boost the morale of the units around them, preventing them from running early. And I think it's an interesting way to do it, and I do obviously like the concept, and I think it's a cool way to put it in game. With the fact of obviously there's every other faction could have a Lord style unit. It's not something that's unique to Lancaster, unique to English. It's almost interesting that this is the time they've chosen to use it. Maybe because of Henry's prevalence as being a frontline fighter alongside his troops, even though he's not a lord.
Could be. I personally love their outfits as well. They've got the coat of arms of the House of Plantagenet. God damn. So I'm really trying to avoid saying that this video, but there you go. And it's that beautiful 3 lines on the top right, 3 lines on the bottom left, fleur-de-lis on the top left, fleur-de-lis on the bottom right. That's like my favorite flag. The actual coat of arms, interestingly, the 3 lions, is the House of Plantagenet. Plantagenet. I don't think I've said it at the same time a single time in this video.
No,
yeah, that house, the House of P. Let's just call it that, right? The House of P, right? Their crest, their coat of arms is the 3 lions, which is the same 3 lions that's on the England football shirt still to this day. So it's actually really quite cool to see these things. But yeah.
So my only gripe then with the unit in game is that they have a crown. They shouldn't.
Oh,
because they are not a king. They are not a king. They are not a prince. You can't be that if you're a lord, because you can't be royalty.
Oh, you're not talking about the visual above the head. You're talking about they literally.
No, they have an actual crown. Yeah,
then that is not okay.
Yeah. Like having a crown as a visual is fine because it just gives you an indication. But the crown as a thing is not correct.
Interesting. Right, next up then, and last before we move on to our bonus segment at the end, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, but we're going to end with one bonus topic that neither of us knew the other one was going to prepare. But I'm going to go through the Earl's Guard. The Earl's Guard essentially is inspired by the fact that lords and like nobles, they had household troops, so like a retinue. These were essentially pro soldiers who were maybe flick to the next image there, Monkey Nuts, just to demonstrate for the people who are viewing them in game. I'm talking about this unit. These were essentially professional soldiers almost, right? In an era where everyone was like peasants and were called upon to fight whenever there was something going on. That made these guys quite significant. They were also loyal to the noble themselves. They were loyal to the lord, not to the king directly. And I think that's really significant, right? Because it means that if the king does something against your lords, these guys are going to fight for the law, right? So it's all about that power of these different areas, and you can imagine there's a lot of room for storytelling. I feel like a lot of Game of Thrones is kind of themes around these kinds of era, these kinds of systems, and it's interesting. So these guys basically they're well armed, they're well armored, they're experienced professionals, they're loyal to the lord or the earl in this case, the Earl's Guard. And their warhammer, which they're pictured with here. So for those of you listening, is basically these soldiers who are really well armored, and they've got this long hammer. On one side, it's flat for absolutely whacking and caving in skulls or whatever, and the other side is spiky for, I suppose, just piercing. Like getting like an upwards hook or something and just caving something in. I don't know, but this actually is not just like a fun visual choice. Oh, that reminds me. Quick throwback to the Hobelar. The short swords are accurate as well that they use, because they use variety of weapons, but the short sword was the most relevant. But to the Earl's Guard, this warhammer is something that was used quite commonly in England, in Burgundy, and in Italy. So it's not just a random thing that they happen to be equipped with. What is a bit odd is that it's a kind of an armor piercing weapon. So that's not really reflected in game in any form of bonus as far as I'm aware. So it's but it's okay. It's visual. It looks cool. That's fine. That's good enough. Yeah. The thing that I don't like though, so all of that is all good, is that in the game they have a throwing knife, and I'm gonna go on a rant here and talk about throwing knives. And maybe it's the heat of the sun blasting on my head right now that's annoying me, but throwing knives get on my nerves.
Before you jump into throwing knives, I actually find it really interesting about the stuff with the anti-armor style weapons. It apparently has a really big evolution in terms of, obviously everyone used to use a sword, and as armor got heavier and more kind of that, the rise of the maces, the warhammers, all these sort of things,
all the cool weapons,
so much more successful. Yeah, I mean, think about it, like all this armor, you hit it with a sword, and it's just like, there's a reason why you have modern day LARPers who are there with like proper swords, where they have the proper wrestling. Have you seen them before? They're like fighting with 4 sets of armor and swords.
I've seen it, but it's always like Russians, like some weird.
But they could do it with proper swords, because the swords do nothing. Whereas if you had a hammer, that's how you actually get through this armor.
That's cool. There you go. There you go.
Go on, throwing knives. Get into your rant.
Yeah, no, my rant is just that in the game they throw throwing knives, right? And what you've brought up here is essentially, so what I was going to say is that they throw throwing knives, and I find it ridiculous because one, this wasn't a thing in this time period. Okay, these guys did not throw throwing knives. Nobody in Europe threw throwing knives. Okay, and the reason is because they're a dumb weapon, right? They're fantasy for assassins and stuff like that. Imagine throwing a knife. This thing is spinning in the air. What are the chances that the pointy end would even hit? Like statistically, you're more likely to just get hit with the side or something. And now imagine everyone is wearing armor. Like, it's just going to go plink. So it's just one of the, unless it's some Assassin's Creed thing where you get it through like the eye lens of the helmet or some mad stuff like that. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, so it's ridiculous that they have those throwing knives, even though it looks cool in game. What Monkey Nuts has brought on the screen here for listeners is I asked him to put these 3 images on here. Not that he has, and the reason I've asked for this is because there were places during this time, the Lancastrian era, where throwing weapons were actually still used effectively. And I've got 3 examples here. On the top left, you have the chakram, and this is in India. So this is a disc, right? Imagine like a circle with a big hole in it. On the inside, it's flat so you could hold it. On the outside is a blade, so it's sharp as hell. How you actually hold this, I'm not sure. I guess you hold it in between your finger knuckles or whatever. I don't know.
Surely there's one little section that wouldn't be bladed, so they could hold it at one point. That's what I was imagining. Is it not? Is the entire thing's bladed?
I thought the entire thing was bladed. I might be wrong. Chakram experts stand up. I didn't look into it in too much detail, but in India they would throw these discs. They would have loads of them, and they just they'd be really skilled at lobbing them. And because they're 360 sharp, or at least I thought they were. It doesn't matter where it hits you. If it hits you, it goes through. And in India, they also didn't have at this time period the heavy armor and stuff like that, or even armor at all, really that much. So that's why it was effective there, and will still use there. The bottom left, you've got the shuriken. Sure, you don't need me to describe this one. Famous Japanese throwing style, basically. This one makes more sense than a knife. Why? Because it's got multiple sides it can actually hit. So when it's flying through the air. But even this wasn't actually used in Japanese militaries. Again, I don't want to go too far off topic here, but samurais weren't walking around with these things, throwing them constantly. It's just something that assassins would use, ninjas and stuff, I suppose. Although there's a whole topic about the ninjas' historical accuracy, but that we'll talk about that another time. But so the throwing star could be used to take out the odd target, but not actually like during a military battle, because everyone would be armored, right? Or at least the samurai. And finally, on the right, you have the mambele. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
This thing looks amazing, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, how do I describe this for listeners? So there's a handle, right? So there's one side which is just a raw handle, and it's like a blade. It's like half sword, but then when it gets to the top, there's like a pointy end, and then it immediately 90 degrees goes left with a spike. Like the opposite direction turns into a curved spike that goes all the way around. It's all sharp, all bladed. And then at the back, like towards the bottom, towards the hilt, there's also a spike going backwards as well, like towards you, or at least I think that's how you hold it. Maybe you hold it the other way around and it goes forward. But the point is, this was an African throwing weapon. And as I said, there's multiple sides you can get cut and killed with this. This one's brutal. Like, it looks like if that hit you, it would honestly send you flying. And I do think that would be have a degree of the kind of armor they'd be wearing in Africa, which, is it's not exactly like plate armor, is it? Like you know, it's probably going to be like something a little more on the basic side during that time period. So that would be destruction if that thing hit you. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really cool though. I guess it's a shame because especially because we have obviously I think it would be stupid. I think people would be annoyed if they put it for Japanese, but for maybe there's a plan of a Delhi Sultanate sub-faction, or because it would make sense for but another Indian variant that we could have the sorry, what are they called again?
Chakram.
Chakrams.
Chakram. Chakram, something like that. Yeah. I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it could be cool. There's
That
loads
would be
of
really
scope.
cool. Yeah. But that's
But yeah, throwing knives, get out of here with that, man. It's the most irritating concept. It just, honestly, it's ridiculous. It's just luck, and you don't. It's just, oh, you know what? I'm gonna stop. Let's move on. Outro time.
One quick little thing was because there was always prevalence of throwing axes, I heard as well, but throwing axes have the same fault, almost a worse fault, surely.
Throwing axes, I have also heard. You know, I can't say I looked too much into it. What I did see was that in the Middle East. Oh, actually, I should say this. If you want to actually have a throwing weapon, including in Europe, but used a lot in the Middle East, the best one is actually just a short spear or a short javelin.
Yeah.
So, like in Middle East, they'd have people on horseback who'd throw javelins, and that actually is, you can imagine the force that would be hitting you with will send you flying. That would pin you into a nearby tree or whatever, right? So that's quite destructive. The axes, it's a good point, man. I can't say I looked into the axes. I can't answer the throwing axe thing. I just think
any historians who look at this want to let us know more about throwing axes. I'd love to hear. So put a comment if you know more about throwing axes.
If you can, or if you're in another form of media, feel free to find the YouTube channel and ask us there. But yeah, let's move on to our outros and our bonus topics for today. Monkey Nuts, do I have one for you? The most highbrow topic you can think of. I got curious when I was learning about shipwrights. How do these people go to the toilet? I mean, think about it. There's no toilet, right? So how are they pulling down their breeches and just letting one rip, like going for it, right?
So it's about shipwrights, the people who build the ships.
No. Sorry, I started thinking about the Navy generally. My bad. Yeah.
Right.
When you're on these ships, how are you going to the toilet? Okay. So if you go to my image of the ship here, so those of you listening, I've just got an old timey boat. It's actually just a pirate ship, just for fun, but it's got like labels of different parts of it. Basically, there's something called the bowsprit and something called the forecastle. Essentially, these are right at the very front of the ship. So like the long stick that comes off the front of the boat, sometimes there's a cool statue on the end or something like that. That's called the bowsprit, I think. I'm not a sailor, so I don't know. And the forecastle seems to be like right at the front of the ship, like at the top. Like where it's quite thick and wide, but then it gets thinner as you go down into the water. That's the forecastle. And these are where you go to the toilet, right? Yeah, you go. Yeah. You go. You crouch there and you unleash, and that's the only way.
So I would have been certain that you just crapped in and peed in a bucket and threw it overboard.
Very interesting you say that. I was going to get to that, but so
I was certain. I'd be like, that is the way you do it. You just in a bucket over the side.
I will come to that, and that is something that did happen, but I'll get to it in a sec. In normal circumstances, this would be expected. Why? There are loads of people on the ship. That is a lot of excrement. And it needs to be dealt with, right? So I want you to imagine you're there. You can't.
Imagine it's like a queue for the.
Exactly. There wasn't enough. There'd be queues every day. Like, and imagine you're just like you can't get to sleep.
Morning, first thing you wake up.
Imagine you're on your hammock. You're swinging. People around you are coughing. Some people are still awake. You decide, you know what? I'm not going to get back to sleep. I'm going to go toilet now. Beat the morning rush. You get up. You kind of hold on to the sides as you go up the steps. The ship is rocking. Yeah. You make it up to the top. That cold breeze from the sea hits you in the face. You go, whoa, like immediately wakes you up, sobers you up. You look over to the bowsprit there, or sprit. You go, all right, you're going to go. There's water crashing onto the ship, flying up and landing on you while you're trying to go to the toilet on this boat, right? And if it sounds dangerous, that's because it is. It was not uncommon for people to literally just die because they fell off while they were trying to go to the toilet. Like, that's just the most middle-aged. And that was just normal. I was like, oh, yeah, what happened to him? Oh, he lost, it's a bit of a rocky...
Lost at sea.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been on a boat where it's a bit, a bit like waves are crashing into you, but you could easily lose your balance and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So if these already have to hang half their body off in order to go, You know, it's
what I will say in terms of for the boats, one thing about ships that people don't know is you see modern ships, you hit waves straight on.
Yeah.
Boats of the time they would have crested, they'd have gone a long wave, so they're actually going to be less rocky than boats are now.
Oh, interesting.
Because modern boats are because they have a power, they're actually designed to go straight at waves and just go straight through them. Whereas from this period, you rode along the waves.
That's okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Either way, though, I would be being very careful. Like at that forecastle bit where you don't have to go along the bowsprit. I think there are like holes, and you can sort of lean and sort of try, and so you're not like open to the naked air entirely, but mostly you kind of are. And yeah, I mean, the reason you had to go there apparently is because, you know, it's the easiest. Like you just fall into the sea and then just get washed away. You know, that kind of thing. So it wouldn't like mark the edges of the, you know, the boat or whatever. But generally, that's how it was done. Chamber pots were used by like the captain and the officers, the nobles, and then a servant would have to come and collect it and then go and throw it overboard. Yeah. Great job, by the way. Can you imagine? That's your life. Like, oh no, he's used the chamber pot again, and you got to walk, you know, all the way to get to the top and dispose of it.
You know what's funny is probably at that time that's not a bad job.
Yeah.
People are like, oh yes, I've got chamber pot duty today.
Yes.
It's probably like an easier day than the other stuff they have to do.
Yeah. And then in terms of the buckets, so in stormy conditions, where people would say the seat is just not usable, right? I actually think the toilet in boats, ships, is called the head because of like their location. And I actually think in the correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the modern day, in ships, the toilet is still referred to as the head, still to this day, even though they have actual toilets and stuff like that. But anyway, so you could go in buckets and stuff, and they were called like slop buckets. The problem is the problem is that they were meant to be dumped when they were safe, but there was a lot of people. Imagine like a warship, like a carrack, which is actually in game as well. A lot of people. That's a lot of buckets, and oftentimes these buckets are near drinking water. They're near the sleeping quarters. It was so. And this is where we get to the hygiene: typhus, dysentery, cholera, common, like all the time. Someone would have this stuff. It's mad. And then the waste would contaminate the water barrels, the food stores in the hold. The smells of like flies and filth. It's just a normal part of just living on the boat. Like you just walking on a boat and you just catch these wafts of this horrendous stench of like the nearby buckets and stuff that people might have used and not emptied yet or whatever. And you're like, yeah, okay, that's just life. That's just my life. You know, that's standard. There would be rules like you're not allowed to poop near ropes or the drinking water and stuff like that. But these were just not very easily to enforce. You know, and at the end of the day, when it's like 30 people queuing for the bowsprit, and you're like, oh mate, I might as well just use the bucket. You know, it's right there. Like I might as well. You know, I can't hold it. I want to go now, kind of thing.
Because what I bet is because obviously the bucket. This is my speculation. The bucket was down below decks because obviously the captain might have been up there, and you can't be shitting in front of the captain. So I can imagine if you because otherwise, my logical brain would be like, you do it on the top deck, you go in the bucket, you immediately throw it overboard. Done. Jobs are good. I guess if you know there's people of importance up there, you weren't probably allowed to do it up there. You have to do it in the lower decks where the captain can't see you, and then sometimes you have to go after every time. No one's bringing the bucket straight up, taking it out, and they're waiting for it to fill up a little bit. Someone else's problem style stuff.
I mean, yeah, I think generally like what I found was that depending on the boat, things could be different. And like the larger ships had more spaces to go and use the toilet, but there were also more crew. Right, the smaller ships had less crew, but they were also less sanitary. These rules were less enforced. Stuff like that. So merchant ships were usually more gross, despite having less people. But yeah, that's my bonus segment for you, Monkey Nuts. What you got for me?
So my bonus segment is so those of you who are big on your history might have noticed that in my archery laws of 1363, I missed one of the leisure activities that was banned. I know a lot of people know the exact wording of that law from 1363, but they'll notice I missed out cockfighting.
Okay.
So I didn't realise cockfighting was big in English history.
Okay.
And it actually stems from, it was introduced by the Romans from the Chinese originally at 55 BC. So it was been around for a long, long time. And it was so important to English culture at that time that it was specifically mentioned as a leisure activity that was banned because of how common practice it was. So it wasn't outlawed. Yeah, I didn't know at all. Apparently, it wasn't outlawed until 1849 as well, and it was still done up until like the 1950s underground. Yeah,
cockfighting. Wow. Okay.
So it was particularly popular around Shrovetide, which I don't know whether it's a British only holiday festival or whether it's across Christianity. Not sure entirely on that. But Shrovetide is just before Lent, where you basically had a celebration. You used up you basically just use up like in the modern times we have Pancake Tuesday or Shrove Tuesday, where you just have pancakes on Tuesday. And I haven't heard of other people in Europe doing this, so I don't know whether it is just a British thing.
I didn't even know
But
that.
we had Pancake Day on Shrove
I
Tuesday.
didn't even
Yeah,
know.
just before Lent.
I didn't even know that Pancake Day was related to religious stuff. So there you go.
Yeah.
Um,
It's supposed to use up all of your goods you have in the house before Lent starts. So before that, you had the big celebrations. That was Shrovetide, and that was it was so popular. So in the 14th and 15th century, one of the hubs of cockfighting was Merton College, which is one of the University of Oxford, so a very famous university. One of their colleges. There's loads of colleges that make up Oxford, and it was such a big player in the cockfighting that they had they gave students they gave students cocks themselves, and then the winners would get a monetary prize and paraded around. And this is directly from Merton College in Oxford, and this is one of the students and their cocks being paraded.
Listeners, what you're looking at here is there are two guys holding up like a stick with another guy sitting on the stick, and he's holding this rooster, which, by the way, for non-English natives, cock. We're talking the bird, right? just in case anyone wasn't clear there. We're talking this rooster. He's holding this rooster, and then there's a guy behind, like waving a flag, or like maybe he's like celebrating the victory or something. I don't know. That is wild.
And there was so much betting around it, and it was apparently big in Wales, England, and it was like there was massive tournaments related to cockfighting. It was crazy. It was
kind of things people did before gaming, eh?
Yeah. I found out another even more brutal one, which is they tie a rooster to like a piece of rope, and people just throw stones at it until it died.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah.
That is
I mean that's Middle Ages disgustingness, isn't it? Well, wow. That's. I mean, just the cockfights themselves are pretty gross, but that is
pretty brutal. Yeah, they literally had the chickens with shivs is what I describe it as.
It's crazy. That is crazy.